Hey, it's Mark Ferguson with Investor More, and I wanted to talk about rents and the price of rents recently and why they seem to be going up so high. So a lot of people out there blame landlords. They think they're just greedy. They're just raising rents for the fun of it, and that is not the case. There's a lot of reasons for higher rents. A lot of it stems from higher housing costs. A lot of it stems from tenant laws and government restrictions. Some of it stems from building codes, some from development restrictions. Some of it stems from wages and construction costs and material costs and insurance costs and property tax costs. All of these are going up significantly, and not just rising a little bit over time, but since COVID, many of these costs have skyrocketed. And we're going to show you what those costs have done, how they've gone up, and talk about how that impacts housing, not just the rental market, but the market overall, and how it makes landlords not want to buy properties, which actually increases rents too. And so part of this, and one of these reasons, is not just the government and different things, but tenants in general. And this is a rental we've had for a while. I own quite a few rentals, houses, commercial properties, multifamily properties. And lately we have seen tenants just not respect properties just over more and more than they used to. Tenants aren't respecting properties or leaving them trashed and just leaving other people to deal with it. And that raises costs too. Now, that's not all the costs that we see incurred in properties, but it is a decent increase, because we'll show you all the costs that are associated with those here in just a second when tenants leave properties with trash in them or destroy the properties, or landlords have to go and do work on the properties. It adds to everything. And if our costs go up, rent has to go up to make it worthwhile, or we sell properties. And if we sell properties, that means fewer rentals and rents go up again. So it's this circle that just keeps making things worse and worse. And we do screen tenants. We do check credit, background, all of that, references. And usually our tenants are good. But like I said, we're seeing more and more who check out okay and then end up not being great tenants. I don't know if that's because of the COVID assistance or just the idea that landlords are bad that's circulating now. And people think, oh, it's not a big deal if I leave my property trash. Landlords are bad. Who cares? It's a good thing. It's not. This is what's raising your rents and costs to some extent. This is one property that got trashed. We've had a few others over the years. And this one wasn't awful, but leaving a property like this adds costs, adds time, and will raise rents. But let's look at all the other things that go into this as well. One thing that can greatly impact the cost of rentals is insurance on those properties. So here you can see Fred, which has some amazing economic data, and the producer price index by industry, premiums for property and casualty insurance, premiums for homeowners insurance. And you can kind of see that it's basically more than doubled in 20 years, which isn't a crazy amount to go up, except you see the biggest increase by far has been the last 2 years. And premiums have gone up significantly. I mean, there's issues in Florida with lawsuits and hurricanes and different things that impact insurance rates. But one thing people don't realize that impacts insurance rates a significant amount are building codes. So Florida has massively changed their building codes because of hurricanes and different things, which makes it more expensive to build houses. Also makes it more expensive to replace houses, which also makes insurance more expensive, because if something goes wrong, you've got to be putting in much more expensive materials, takes longer. And you're seeing across the board building codes significantly becoming more strict across the country, which increases insurance rates. And I'm not saying building codes are bad or that we shouldn't have them, but they increase costs. And one thing that this last administration had done was a climate change building code plan, and they spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get states to implement climate change building codes. And the National Builders Association estimated that would add $31,000 per new house if states implement those changes, which also means insurance will go up because houses are more expensive. It's more expensive to replace them. So this is a cost I've seen increase on my property significantly. We've had one property almost double insurance the last year. My big property, the strip mall, was $26,000 a year last year. Our new bill is $45,000 on it. So we're shopping around, we're trying to find better deals, but insurance is a huge cost and always increasing for landlords, and makes rent more expensive. Something else that greatly impacts our costs, which impacts rent, are property taxes, and those are always increasing as well. Some years more than others, sometimes more than others. The last couple of years, we've seen the greatest increase in property taxes in Colorado that I've seen my entire life, probably in the history of the state. Part of that is because of the way taxes are calculated, and because they decided to increase the valuations close to actual value, sometimes more than actual value this year for some reason, where in the past, Colorado had always seemed to value properties way less than what they're actually worth. So it's strange, and I don't think it's just my county. It's across the board where this happened. I don't know if all the counties got together and decided they needed to increase revenues or what. The other really weird thing with Colorado is you have different rates between residential and commercial. Every state has different rates, amounts for taxes. Colorado has some of the cheapest residential property taxes in the country. To make up for it, they have some of the most expensive commercial property taxes in the country. And on commercial, sometimes a tenant pays those directly with triple net leases. I have that on some of my properties. And when those property taxes go up, their rent goes up directly, or the triple net costs go up directly to pay for those taxes. And on residential properties, when taxes go up, rent it goes up to make up for those costs. So in this particular property, in 2018, it was valued at $125,000. And that was a commercial property. The taxes are $32.20 a year. They're so high on cheap commercial properties. But what happened was, in 2024, my value went up to $352,000, and my taxes are $7,717 a year on this property. And this property rents for $1,800 a month. So, let's see if we can do some quick math. 1,800 times 12 equals that. And then what I say it was, 7,100 divided by 20. We're just doing real basic numbers. 33% of my rent goes to property taxes on this property. No, more than that. I used too small of numbers. Almost 35% of my rent goes to property taxes on this one, because this one is not triple net. It is not directly paid by the tenant. I pay it as a gross rent. So their rent has to go up to pay for those taxes and insurance on this property and other costs that we have. And that's not the only one. Let's see what we've got here. This is actually an industrial property. So in 2018, the tax bill was $1,067, and this one is more treated. This is in the county. It's not actually in the city, so the taxes are much lower in the county than the city too, which is something to think about when buying properties. And this was in 2018. Now my taxes are $1,908 based on a $430,000 valuation. So obviously that's a big increase that we have to account for. Another one we have here is this is a residential property, just a house. The taxes were $1,099 in 2018. Now they are $1,608. So not as big of an increase, but again, a 60% increase over 5 years or so is a pretty big increase and adds up over time. Another thing that greatly impacts rent prices are tenant laws and changes in your state as far as landlord versus tenant friendly states. California has some of the highest rents. Washington has some of the highest rents. New York has some of the highest rents. All of them have some of the strictest tenant laws in the business. They also ironically have some of the strictest building codes. I shouldn't say business, I should say in the country. I do not think of politics as a business. They are the opposite of a business, how it should run. So for Colorado, we've had changes to eviction laws where now we are a no-cause eviction state, which isn't quite as bad as California, but they basically don't want you to be able to tell a tenant to leave for any reason, even though it's your property. You have to have a valid reason. In California, if you want a tenant to leave and they don't want to leave, you literally have to pay them for months of relocation costs, or it's getting pretty crazy. And there's all kinds of changes to occupancy limits, which actually helps landlords because we can rent properties to more people, increase rents, which actually increases housing values. But and I don't say increases rents per person, but increases rents per property. For that, no rental property gouging law. I'm not sure how that is enforced. Changes to disability-based discrimination laws. I ran into this myself, where we had a tenant who missed payments. If they get any kind of assistance for income, you have to go through mediation now, and the landlord has to pay for mediation. It can add, months to the process. All of this adds costs and time and headaches to the landlord. And we've gone through issues with squatters where we can't, someone moves in who shouldn't be on the lease. You can't just get rid of them in some states. You have to evict them. And sometimes the courts don't want to evict them because they don't have anywhere to go. We ran through that personally as well. You can find that on my channel. It seems ridiculous and crazy, but that's how it works. And so every time these situations happen, every time landlords experience them, it costs them lots of money. And they have to look at their books and say, okay, do I keep doing this? Do I raise rents? Or do I sell my properties? And a lot of people will say, well, sell your properties. It'll make the world better. If you sell your rental properties, you're probably selling them to a new landlord who's going to want a good return on their investment, who might come in and raise rents even more than a current landlord would. Or you might be selling to an owner-occupant if it's a house, which has happened more than landlords have been buying. I know people don't believe that because of the media, but we'll show those figures here. And if you do that, it means there's fewer rentals. If there's fewer rentals, it means higher rents. All of this adds to rent costs. All right, now we're looking at average hourly earnings of all employees construction, which shows us how much the average hourly wage is for someone doing construction work. Right now, it sits at $38.26. So people thinking landlords just sit around, don't do anything, or pay minimum wage. That is not true, because we have tenants who trash houses, as you've seen, who do damage. We rehab houses that we buy all the time that need work, or multifamily properties or commercial properties. We're spending lots and lots of money rehabbing them and fixing them up for tenants. Well, you can see wages were they weren't flat, but they've been increasing for a while, from kind of 2010 to 2020. And then there's been a much sharper increase since then for wages. If our costs increase, again, rents have to increase to make up for those increase in costs, or it's not worth owning properties. We sell them, there's too few rentals, rents go up even more. This is how it works over and over again. The same thing happens with rent control. We didn't talk about that. Rent control also raises prices. There's multiple studies, like the San Francisco Harvard study on rent control, that shows rent control causes rents to go up because landlords sell their properties, they don't build new properties, supply goes down, and they will always raise their rents all the time when they have a chance, because they know they're limited to when they can do it. Where without rent control, many times landlords don't raise rents. I do it all the time where I don't raise rents, but with rent control, I probably would raise them more. So it has the opposite effect. That could be a whole nother different video. I think I might have done a different video on that. But this is one thing that increases our costs, is wages. And despite, again, what you hear, yes, wages have been going up. In fact, wages have been going up higher than inflation overall, and that's a cost that we have to incur. Now, we don't just have labor, we have construction materials, construction costs, which also add to our costs when repairing, when rehabbing, and when tenants destroy properties. People say, oh, it's just the cost you eat. It doesn't work that way. And you can see construction costs. This goes way back. And this is tricky because when you go that far back, the first part of the graph is always going to look very flat because you don't see the increases. But here, this is a better idea since 1992. Prices were pretty stable, jumped up there a little bit, pretty stable until 2020. And we saw this massive jump in construction costs. And everybody's seen this. This causes new houses to be more expensive, which causes overall houses to be more expensive. Again, labor causes houses to be more expensive. All of that causes things to be more expensive when you're rehabbing. So it makes things more expensive. And if things are more expensive for the landlord or the home builder, prices are going to go up. That's how it works. And this idea you just blame landlords because they're raising prices, well, there's a reason we're raising prices. It would be awesome if I didn't have to raise rents, if I could make the same amount of money without raising rents, because I would probably have a bigger renter pool. I could pick better tenants. I could buy more properties because properties would be cheaper. They wouldn't be as expensive. It's better for everyone when prices are lower. So just because rent is high, it doesn't mean we're making more money. In a lot of cases, it means we're making less money because the properties are actually more expensive to run and own when rents are high. Now, a lot of people will say, well, investors are buying all the houses, they're raising prices because of it, and they're just bumping up rents. Well, those are two different things. We're on my blog right now, an article I wrote about how many houses investors are really buying, and this might surprise you a lot based on what you hear on the media. But if investors are buying all the houses and taking up the inventory, that could raise prices, I agree. Too much demand could raise prices if there's not enough supply. However, the same logic is applied that if investors are buying all the houses and renting them out, that does not raise rents. That would lower rents because you're increasing the supply of rentals. If there's more options, more supply, that should lower or at least keep the price stable. So you can't use different logic in the same situation and come up with different results. It's got to be one or the other. And in reality, we can see that the problem is investors are not buying all the houses. They are buying a larger percentage of houses than they were in the past. I think my blog updated and messed up some of my spacing, sorry. We have articles or videos on this as well. But here are actual numbers from the ACS, American Consumer Survey from the US Census, on how many houses are owner-occupied versus renter-occupied over time. And the big issue is that when people say investors are buying a bigger percentage, one, it doesn't tell us how many total they're buying because the number of houses has been decreasing. And two, it doesn't tell us how many houses they're selling, which is a huge impact on supply and demand. It turns out investors have been selling more houses than they're buying since 2016. So here we can see renter-occupied single-family houses. Starting in 2010, we went from 13 million to 14 million, which is slightly more. But look at this. It went from 13 million to 15.2 million in 2016. A huge increase of rental houses. Investors were buying a lot of rentals. From 2016 to now, it's gone from 15.2 million to 14.2 million. And the number I've heard now, we don't have the 2023 data yet, is that this is closer to 14 million. We've had a massive decrease in the number of rentals in housing, single-family houses, since 2016. That lowers supply. That increases rents because there are fewer rentals available. During this whole time where we're actually building more houses, which says, hey, if they're building more houses, there should be more owner-occupied, more rental homes out there. There's not. They're selling more rentals. So in that same time period, we've seen owner-occupied houses go from 66 million to almost 75 million. So this is why the owner-occupied rate has gone from 62% in 2016 to 66% now. So investors are not buying all the houses. It's actually owner-occupants who are buying way more houses, which creates fewer rental properties, which creates higher rents. All right, now we're looking at trading economics chart because Fred doesn't have existing home prices. A lot of people see the Fred median home price chart, and that's actually just for new houses. So I want to show existing houses because that gives us a better picture of what's happening in the market. This goes back to 68 when you can see what prices steadily went up. Then we had the run up to the crash, a big drop. We had a run up and then the big increase after 2020. And again, I am a huge proponent of building costs being the reason that housing prices go up. Building codes, material, labor, all of that, development restrictions cause housing prices to go up. Because if it's cheap and easy to build houses, builders will build houses. They want to make money. They want to build houses. They want to make money. And they don't want to charge too much for housing because, again, if they're charging too much, it limits their buyer pool. They can't sell as many houses. It's bad for business. They would prefer cheap prices as well. But we can see prices jumped up a lot. Well, how does that impact investors? Yes, there's some investors who bought back here and bought at low prices, and they still own those properties at low prices. However, as we're saying, many investors are selling their properties. More investors are selling their properties and buying new ones. And for those new investors, they need to make a return on their investment for it to make sense to them to invest. That means they're buying at these high elevated prices. And if they're buying at these high elevated prices, rents have to be high enough to justify that purchase, or they won't buy. And if rents aren't high enough, they simply won't buy the properties. And if they won't buy the properties, that means we see a big decrease in rentals again, which means rents go up. Rents will just keep going up until they're high enough that new investors will buy or build properties to get the return they want. And that's just basic economics. So unfortunately, the cost to build, the cost of existing houses directly impacts what rent costs will be. The higher those go, the higher rents go. If there's really somebody you want to blame in all of this for high rents, high cost of housing, it is the government. They have made building codes much stricter. They have made developing new properties much harder. They have implemented tenant-friendly landlord laws, rent control, all these regulations that make things more expensive and harder. All of those things make rents and property values go up. And we've seen it more since COVID because they went crazy with shutting down businesses, not letting them produce goods, which raised material costs. We've seen much stricter building codes and different things come into play with climate change. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying they won't help the environment, but there is a cost to those in higher housing costs and rental costs, and we see that. So with housing, especially with houses, the more expensive a house is, the less the rent is compared to that house because people just can't pay it. And landlords, when housing gets more expensive, they stop buying houses for the most part and tend to move into multifamily commercial properties. That's what I did. And when you do that, it means there's less rentals for people. Rents go up. All right, I will leave you with a rental that was left in great shape. This is my 7th rental property. I ended up selling this, doing a 1031 exchange into another mixed-use property that had apartments and commercial because it didn't make sense to keep this property as a rental because prices had gone up, and it didn't make sense to buy new single-family houses because prices went up. So we ended up selling it and going into other assets, which means there's fewer houses for rent, which raises rents, my whole point here. And a lot of people are really mad at corporate landlords right now too, and I can show those figures, but 0.5% of houses are owned by big corporate landlords. About 400,000 to 600,000 out of 89 million houses are owned by large corporations. It's a tiny fraction. And so those corporate landlords, those big landlords, are some of the only ones who are actually buying houses to rent right now. They are not ruining the housing market. I know this is a take that many people think is awful, but big corporations are some of the only ones providing rentals for people right now. If they weren't around buying some of these houses, there'd be even fewer rentals. Rents would be probably even higher. And some of these big corporations are building houses now too. I know a lot of people are getting mad at them for building houses. We need more houses. We need more rental houses. We need more owner-occupied houses. If they are building houses, they are helping our housing inventory shortage. And it's not like they're taking away building resources, because since interest rates went up, we have seen building permits for single-family houses decrease by about 30%, which means they're building less with higher interest rates. Don't forget, higher interest rates make it more expensive on landlords and builders too. So the government, which has sort of raised interest rates, the Federal Reserve has done it, which is sort of like a government entity, but not really, but they're overseen and appointed by the government, so they kind of are a government entity, have raised interest rates significantly. Rates used to be 3, 4, 5%. Now they've been 6, 7%. For investors, it's even higher. Investors pay a higher rate than owner-occupants they're around 7, 8, 9%. I just did a refinance at 9% of many of my properties. When we're refinancing properties, which many investors have to do, because when they own quite a few properties, you can't get 30-year fixed loans, or the interest rates are way higher if you do. Investors have different types of loans than owner-occupants. We have to refinance those every 5 years, sometimes every 10 years, and you have to refinance at current rates. So with interest rates higher, again, our costs go up. That means if we keep these rentals, we might have to raise rents or sell properties again. Builders, the same thing. They have less buyers. They have more costs when rates go up because all their suppliers use loans, builders use loans, almost every business uses loans. So higher interest rates raise costs too. So what we're seeing, if you want to believe me, I know many of you won't because I say I'm in the business and biased and all that. Well, I know a lot of people also said trust the experts here the last few years. But then when it comes to real estate, they say, well, don't trust the experts. They're wrong. I know everything without any real estate experience. Anyway, that's another tangent. But I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen it for a long time. I've seen a lot of stuff happen. And I'm 100% confident in the high cost of housing for rents, building new houses, existing houses, is 90% caused by our government policies and regulations. And the more regulations they enact, probably the higher housing costs will go. So that's why rents are high. That's why housing costs are high. That's why it's hard for people to find rentals. That's why it's hard for landlords to make money with rentals because of the costs and everything going on. Now, having said that, if you made it to the end of this video, even after all of this, the United States still has like the 6th most affordable houses to buy in the world. Not the 6th cheapest, the most affordable. So based on wages and housing costs, yes, with higher interest rates, the U.S. is still one of the best places, most affordable places to buy a house. Before interest rates went up, it was like number 3. Only South Africa and I think it's Saudi Arabia were cheaper because they have massive programs to help owner-occupants buy houses. So it's still a little cheaper there. Otherwise, it's still one of the best places in the world to buy a house, even with everything that's been going on. All right. Thanks for watching. If you stuck it all the way through, I appreciate it. If you have comments, leave them below. And hopefully this helps some people understand the market and what's happening and what has happened, and probably what's going to continue to happen in the future because the government loves to make policy and make regulations to fix things, which usually just makes things more expensive.